We had the privilege of hearing on Palm Sunday from Brianna Bailey, who's one of our other parish pastor apprentices. She shared with us about the triumphal entry of Jesus into the city of Jerusalem. And tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from Sue Bailey, who has a striking resemblance to her daughter, Brianna Bailey.
I'm just older, much older.
We have a unique privilege here tonight, and I want to make sure that we don't miss it. It's pretty rare that a parent and a child would both have the same interest and gift in preaching, okay? It's even more rare that they would go to the same church. It's even more rare that they would go to a church as small as ours, because it's just a smaller group of people to choose from. And it's even more rare that they would both be women. And so it's a unique thing that we get to experiment with. I guess, I don't know, I was going to say experience, but I guess we could say experiment. Because this has never happened in the history of church, that we would have two people who are related. I don't know. I just haven't seen it myself, at least. I'm thankful for it. Sue and I have known each other for quite some time. I think 2013, maybe. We were ordained in the same denomination on the same night, actually. And so would you do me a favor, please, and put your hands together and give the Reverend Sue Bailey a warm Inglewood welcome.
Well, thanks, Nathan. It's really good to be here. So today we begin this series called Eastertide, and as Nathan has said, it's this 50-day season in the Christian calendar where we get to celebrate the resurrection of Christ and think more broadly and more deeply about the implications for this for us every day, not just at Easter. So it is a celebration. So if you got here late, it's a bummer because there was champagne out there earlier, and I want you to know that I did not partake of it. I thought coffee would be better for me tonight, so hopefully. So I've been invited to begin the season by unpacking the story of the empty tomb found in the book of John. And John's story of the empty tomb focuses on a courageous woman. That's a good choice, right? Yeah! Courageous woman, and her name is Mary. And what we're going to soon discover is that this Mary Magdalene, plays a major role in the life of Christ, and yet we know surprisingly little about her. She's one of at least 5 women in the New Testament called Mary, and unless we're careful, we kind of get them messed up, which people have done over the ages, and for that reason, Mary Magdalene has gotten a pretty bad reputation for no good reason. So, contrary to popular belief, Mary Magdalene is not the woman caught in adultery in John 8, nor is she that sinful woman who anointed Jesus' feet in Luke 7. This being true, Mary doesn't seem to be able to shake these bad raps. Has anybody seen Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion? Okay. That is not the Mary. So what do we know about Mary Magdalene? Well, we know that she's likely called Mary because she's from a town called Magdala, which was a small fishing town on the Sea of Galilee. It was within walking distance of Capernaum, which is where Jesus started his ministry. We know she was one of a group of women who became followers of Christ, and they followed the apostles. They went from village to village. She offered financial support. She learned from the rabbi. We know that from Luke that Jesus cast out 7 demons from Mary. So before Mary met Jesus, she was enslaved by demonic power. So how she actually got into this miserable condition and what kind of demons controlled her, the Bible doesn't say. But if one demon is bad, imagine what 7 demons is like. So because of that, there's a really good chance that she has been unable to keep it on the slide, right? She's going to be ostracized. People are going to push away from her in society. It's hard to say whether she was ostracized or not, but what we do know is that Jesus set Mary free. And when he set her free, he liberated her from evil spirits that had kept her chained, figuratively and probably literally. And so Mary was indebted to Jesus, and she loved him, and she followed him wherever he went. In fact, Mary followed Jesus from the cross all the way to the grave. So when Jesus hung on the cross, the Magdalene stood beside Jesus' mother, viewing through tear-filled eyes. And when the soldiers took his limp body down, imagine this, Mary was there to see that awful, gory sight. And when they hastily placed Jesus in the tomb at sunset on the Sabbath, Mary was sitting on a rock, watching it all happen. And finally, early on Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene followed this dark path back to the gravesite, only to find that her Lord was not there. So as we read John's story of the empty tomb, found in John 20, notice we're told right up front that for Mary Magdalene, the day of Christ's resurrection, the day that we celebrate as Easter, began while it was still dark. It began in darkness, it began in despair and death. And all gospel accounts of the resurrection vary on some points, but what is consistent is that it's the first day of the week, and it's this Mary Magdalene, who first discovers the empty tomb. So as I read John's report of the empty tomb, try to place yourself at this scene. Try to envision being there on that first Easter morning. John 20. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one that Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in the strips of linen lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived and went into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. The cloth was folded up by itself, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still didn't understand from the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes. But Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look at the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she didn't realize it was Jesus. "Woman," he said, "why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've taken him away, tell me where you've put him, and I'll go get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, Don't hold on to me, for I have not yet turned to my Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. The word of the Lord. So when Mary gets to the tomb, she finds that the tombstone has been rolled away, and she plunges into despair. The only human explanation, think about it, was that someone or some group had stolen the body. They've taken him right out of the grave. I mean, can you imagine her despair? Take a moment, and I want you to think about someone that you know, that you love, whomever you love deeply in this world. Now, within 24 hours, you have gone within celebrating that person's life to watching them die a cruel and agonizing death. How would you cope? Then after experiencing that nightmare, you go to visit the grave only to find these mounds of dirt and this empty hole. I mean, Mary was undone. The tomb was empty. And it seems obvious to her what's happened. So she quickly runs for help, right? She runs to Peter and the beloved disciple, who most likely is the Apostle John, to tell them this horrifying news. When she finds them, they're at home, feeling hopeless and in hiding. Now, after hearing the news, both Peter and John race to the tomb. It says John beats Peter to the grave, but it's Peter that boldly rushes in first and looks around. He sees the empty grave clothes, and he confirms the tomb is empty. But this is different than the 4-day dead Lazarus. Remember that Jesus raised from the dead in, what is that? Yeah, John 11. I should know that, right? Yeah, when we are told that story, we are also told that when Lazarus came out, he came out kind of like stumbling and hindered by his grave clothes. But Jesus' burial clothes are left behind. Something strange is going on. Why are Jesus' clothes still in the tomb? The linen wrappings are at one end, and the cloth, the apron that covers his head, is kind of rolled up and placed at the other end. That's odd. Would a grave robber be so neat and tidy? I mean, something's amiss, right? After Peter looks in the tomb and seems unimpressed, John looks inside. He goes inside. John looks in the empty tomb, and we are told that he believes. He sees and believes. But what did John believe? I mean, maybe he believes Mary's correct. Jesus' body has been stolen. Or did he maybe remember what Jesus had said on the way to Jerusalem, as recorded in the book of Mark, that the Son of Man is going to be betrayed, handed over to the Gentiles, mocked, spit upon, flogged, killed, but 3 days later he will rise. Even though we're told that John didn't fully understand from the scriptures that Christ had to rise from the dead, he does see and believe something, right? John knows there's more going on to the empty tomb than meets to the naked eye. Later in John's gospel, Jesus tells doubting Thomas, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and believed." Perhaps John here is kind of a forerunner. Maybe he's the first to not actually see the risen Christ, because he hasn't yet anyway, but still believe. The reader, we, are kind of left wondering. What is strange, at least to me, is that after seeing the empty tomb, the two disciples, they leave. They go home. There's no shouts of joy. There's no celebration. Peter and John both see, and John even sees and believes, at least partially, but the emptiness of the tomb doesn't seem to have made much of a difference in the lives of the disciples, at least not yet. Mary, however, this Mary, courageous Mary, remains vigilant at the empty tomb. She's crying, she's weeping. She's not just weeping, actually. She's like wailing and lamenting at the loss of her master. I mean, have you ever wept? I mean, really, really wept. I have. You've heard that saying, what's the difference between love and marriage? You know, love is blind and marriage is eye-opening. Well, my first 2 years of marriage were eye-opening and really difficult. So much so that I humbly tell you, I was ready to call it quits. I told Brent I was done. And Brent, gratefully, wouldn't comply. Instead, he suggested that he and I take a vacation, let's go away together, which we did. So a month later, after we came home from our vacation, life still wasn't good. And I wanted out. Then I found out I was pregnant. This was not in my plans. I was so angry. I was confused. I was undone. I was way too selfish to be having a baby. And what happened is I started crying out. And I remember this so vividly because I was in my kitchen in our old house, and I just started crying. I just started crying out to God uncontrollably. Actually, I was crying at the world first, and then finally I got to crying out to God and just yelling and screaming until I kind of just collapsed in this wet heap in my kitchen on my cold linoleum floor. And that's when I gave my life to Christ. And somehow in the midst of all this, I remember faintly thinking or saying, I don't know, I'm tired of doing it my way. I don't know what to do, show me the way forward. I give up. Show me the way forward. And he did. And 8 months later, my son Josh was born. And my marriage, though still not always easy, I love you, Brent, but it's very good, but it's not always easy. It's a testimony to the power of God to transform situations and hard hearts like mine. Because Jesus met me in my darkness and my despair. And I sometimes feel guilty telling that story, to be honest, because I know there's a lot of people who have tried to have children and can't, and here I am. God just kind of, we call it the immaculate tequila exception. Anyway, so yeah, but I feel guilty because so many people can't have children, and yet, God works with us differently, doesn't he? And for me, this is what brought me to my knees. And you probably have your own story. And I encourage you, I hope you share your stories so that other people can have hope, and they can see, and they can believe. But back to our story. Why was Mary weeping? Well, she weeps because Jesus is dead, and someone has stolen his body. She's weeping because the tomb is empty. What should have been good news, right, was breaking her heart. And I had to kind of stop and ask myself here, if Jesus was removed from my life right now, would I be weeping like Mary, like there's no tomorrow? And how about you? Is Jesus so ingrained? Is his love so saturated in your being that the thought of losing him would just create this gut-wrenching despair that, you couldn't get over? No one else could replace. We would say today that the empty tomb is the greatest proof of the resurrection, right? And it is. And yet Mary remains weeping at the tomb. You see, she sees, but not clearly. Mary had all the right facts. Christ was dead, he was buried, the tomb is empty, but she jumped to the wrong conclusion. She looked at the situation, but she really didn't see what was happening. I think we often do the same thing, don't we? We're faced with trials and unexplained tragedies. We often weep over our circumstances, like I did when I found out I was pregnant. And hear me, there's nothing wrong with weeping. But if we had God's perspective, we might see more clearly and truly believe that no matter how dire our circumstances, Jesus meets us in our darkness and despair. So after Mary explains why she's weeping to the two angels, can you imagine what that was like? Jesus himself appears to her and asks her the same question. Woman, why are you weeping? But he adds, who are you looking for? Mary answers, but she doesn't recognize the Lord. Why didn't Mary recognize Jesus? She's been hanging out with him a lot. Well, there's been a lot of discussion over this, a lot of ink spilled in commentaries, but the main reason seems to be that Jesus didn't want Mary to recognize him at first, so that he could teach her some important truths. She had to learn that Jesus is the author of life, and that he has overcome death. She had to learn from that day forward that Jesus would be with her always, even when he was no longer visible to the naked eye. Blessed are those who do not see, but still believe. And I tell you, some things when things are hard with me, it's hard to admit, but I don't feel God's presence, and you start thinking, he's abandoned me. Where is he in this? Where is he in this situation? If only you and I could see more clearly during those dark times, maybe I actually looked these up online, these professional night goggles, right? We could see Jesus walking beside us every step of the way, because just because we can't see him doesn't mean he's not there. Jesus asked Mary, who are you looking for? Not what are you looking for? And those are two different questions. Mary was looking for what? A body, right? She was looking for something. Jesus pointed her to someone, to himself. I mean, how often do we, I'll just say me, how often do I look for something to comfort me in my despair? Food, toys, pornography, sex, okay, not so much that much. When we should be looking for Christ. Then Jesus calls Mary's name, and Mary instantly knew and responded to her Lord, Rabboni! Mary knew his voice, and Jesus knew her name. Next, in what only can be regarded as a monumental moment in history, and the reason I'm here sharing this story with you, is that Jesus chose Mary Magdalene from among all his followers to be the first to see the resurrected body and to be commissioned to proclaim his good news. Why would God choose a woman? Come on now. Why would God choose a woman to be his spokesperson? Now, mind you, Mary wasn't some superstar, right? By human standards, and even though we've established that she was not a woman of ill repute, she was previously demon-possessed. So chances are she didn't have a lot of credibility. But God's ways are not our ways. The weak or least of these are often the ones that God elevates. Jesus turned man's wisdom upside down. So who does God give the honor to of being the first to witness the risen Lord? A woman. While Peter and John were at the tomb, Jesus does not appear to them. He could have, right? And he does later. Rather, Jesus chooses to appoint a woman as his witness, despite the fact that in Jesus' day, women were not considered credible witnesses in a court of law. This is God's upside-down kingdom. And friends, you know, this is the way of Jesus. Instead of choosing a rich and famous person, a beautiful person, to testify to his divinity, God chose a previously demon-possessed woman to be the apostle to the apostles. Now, there's two criteria to be a big A or an original apostle. I'm going to add a third. First, you need to have seen the risen Lord. Second, you need to have been sent by Jesus himself to proclaim him to the world. And third, apparently you don't need to be a woman. I mean, you are a woman. You don't need to be a man. Mary qualifies on every count. She is a woman, right? And she's the first to do so. So Mary Magdalene is actually given this title, Apostle to the Apostles. I find that pretty encouraging. The renowned theologian N.T. Wright, who has been quoted here at Sacred Grace many a time, says this, quote, John has told us nothing of her history. The little we know from the other Gospels. But her place is spectacular. She is the first apostle, the apostle to the apostles. The first to bring the news that the tomb was empty and a greater privilege yet, the first to see, the first to meet, and to speak with the risen master himself. So even in the Jewish culture, where women were not qualified or authorized to teach, John's gospel portrays the risen Christ commissioning a woman to teach the male disciples the most basic tenet of the Christian faith. And the Greek is really vivid here. Literally, Mary came telling. She couldn't stop talking about her encounter with the Lord. The mourner had become the missionary. She didn't merely repeat Jesus' words. She proclaims them. She announces with joy, I have seen the risen Lord. And as a woman called to ministry, Nathan knows this, I have had seasons of darkness, rejection, and despair. And Mary's example of courage in the midst of what seems like dire circumstances has been a source of comfort and strength for me personally. And I'd like to suggest that Mary's story can be encouraging to you as well. Whatever your status in life, and I don't know all your stories, but whether you are male or female, you are young or old, you're rich or poor, it doesn't matter. We all go through difficult times, don't we? Yeah. I mean, maybe you have recently. I was listening, and I think someone was praising they had gotten a home, but maybe you've lost one. Maybe you've lost a home. Maybe you've lost a loved one. Maybe you're struggling in your marriage, with your health. Whatever it is, wherever you are or find yourself today, I think we would be hard-pressed to find a better biblical role model on how to have persistent hope in the midst of life's challenges than Mary Magdalene. So remember, Jesus has risen. Jesus has risen. He promises to be with you and me always. And like Mary, he is never going to leave us or forsake us. And as we continue to reflect upon the resurrection during these 50 days of Eastertide, we can courageously celebrate the fact that Jesus will be with us in our darkness and despair. Even when we can't see him, he's there. And that is good news. So let's pray. Oh, Lord, I thank you that you are El Roy. Lord, you are the God who sees, and you see each one of us individually. Lord, I thank you for every person who's here this evening. Lord, I just ask that you do continue to walk with us individually, Lord, and as a church. And Lord, help us to continue to live out the truth of your resurrection, the truth that you have not only risen from the dead, but you have ascended to the Father, and you intercede on our behalf, Lord, and you are with us always. Thank you, and we love you. Amen.